Well, ladies and gentlemen, today I wanted to go over the steps in layman's terms when it comes to Alberta fully seceding. There's some questions. It's really hazy. There's not a 100% formal blueprint on what needs to be accomplished to get the Alberta secession movement to achieve its goal of seceding from Canada. And quite frankly, we don't know what they want to do in terms of them being an independent, functioning country, or them joining the United States, or maybe a combination of the two to where they're independent, but they have some very overarching agreement with the US for protection and for free trade. And so that's really kind of the haziness in terms of that. We know the referendum should be happening. They're saying there's a very, very good chance of it happening, considering the amount of signatures required to trigger the referendum was lower. But I just asked the AI, give me in simplest form, if Alberta or any province within Canada were to leave, what are the steps? And you can see, I'm sorry, I know my webcam blocks some of this out, but I will read this. They say there's 5 different steps. And here's the thing. I've asked these AI models, different ones, different things on secession from Canada. They all come up with different answers. There's a general agreement that a few different things would have to happen, like a referendum, like negotiations with Ottawa. But we're just going to go through this. So they say decision to secede is the first step. The province's government would first need to decide they want to separate from Canada, and that would be through the referendum. And it's important, and it doesn't say this here, but it's important to know that the verbiage is extremely meaningful when it comes to the question of how would it be approached? Would it just be, do you want to leave Canada? They need to do it. You can't hold the referendum and say, would you be interested in giving Alberta more autonomy? That's too vague. That doesn't do it. It has to be a clear-cut question. And so you need some legal and constitutional changes as well. They say Canada's constitution would need to be amended according to the Clarity Act. The federal government would require a clear majority of people in the province to vote in favor of separation in a referendum. So they don't add the nuance of what happened with Quebec in the 90s, why the Clarity Act was created. They would need more than a simple majority. Now, this is where it gets kind of hazy. We don't know, is that 52%, 53%? There's no definitional explanation when it comes to Canadian law in terms of what would be required. Again, is it 55%? Is it 60%? I would probably say it's like 53, 54%. If it's 51 to 49, that's a simple majority. According to the Clarity Act, they would not be able to leave. And that is kind of understandable. I mean, it's 50-50. It's very close. This is a seismic thing. So it would have to be a clear majority, the Clarity Act. Negotiations. The province and the federal government would need to negotiate the terms of separation, such as border issues, distribution of resources, and debts. So, any debt that they had, they'd have to pay it back. I don't think Alberta really has any debt, considering they subsidize for other countries, or excuse me, for other provinces within their country. And they've got a ridiculous amount of natural resources, although there would be negotiations when it comes to maybe some of the indigenous land. We're going to talk about that here in a second, with the indigenous people saying they're called the First Nations in Canada. They're saying they have to negotiate with us to be able to secede as well. So there's a lot of different factors at play, but negotiations would have to happen in terms of certain, is the border going to stay the same within the province of Alberta? Some people saying, well, there might be border issues that arise in the future. The thing is, with the Albertan border, where it's located right next to BC and Saskatchewan, a lot of rural area. You're really not dealing with any crazy border issues between BC and Alberta, or Alberta and Saskatchewan. Then you've got new government legal framework. The province would need to set up its own government legal systems. And so a lot of that could be carried over from what they already have within their own province. But some things would change, and that would take some time for sure. And that goes to the whole nuance of, would they really need to overhaul everything? If they become their own country, they would. Or if they join the United States or have some type of agreement with the United States to where they almost function as like a proxy province to the US, it would be a lot easier to do. But either way, something like that would have to happen. And then formal separation. Once agreements are made, the separation would officially be recognized. Now, see, in this, from what I've read with other things, there's a lot of debate on this topic, on whether or not the other provinces have a say in one of the provinces seceding from the country. They say, well, yes, they do. My thing is, I think if there is a vote with the other provinces, and people say, well, there should be, it doesn't say it here, but if there is a vote with the other provinces leaders and their governments, if through the referendum 60% of the people want to leave, you would have to figure they would vote in favor of it. The problem is Alberta, because of the natural resources, because of how rich it is, you would figure none of these other provinces would be in favor of them leaving. Now, this is where Trump can come in and maybe coax it through political pressure because of how powerful the United States is. If the United States, if it's 60-40, this is what I said yesterday, if it's 60-40 in terms of the referendum, and it's a clear-cut question with clear verbiage in terms of them leaving, then Trump could say, well, we recognize it, the people voted for it, so that's what should happen. And so what we know is there has to be a referendum, at least one referendum. There's going to have to be constitutional changes. I believe there has to be agreement with all of the provinces. There has to be negotiations depending on, what is Alberta going to lose, a land? I don't think that would happen. I think that they as a province would be able to leave. Maybe they'd have to give up something depending on how tethered they are to Ottawa. But it's not a thing to where they're taking all of this government handout and they would be losing that lifeline. That's not the case at all when it comes to them because of their natural resources and how rich they are in terms of that. And it just depends. Do they want to separate and become their own country? I don't think they really could become their own country. Technically, they don't need a military, but ideally you would want to have some very close-knit relationship with the U.S. And so another thing that I wanted to look at, you've got this Alberta separation requires consent from First Nations. A local First Nation leader said separating Alberta from Canada would prove to be difficult, saying that you need to consent the First Nationers on the separation, and so they would probably negotiate and try and get something. That's the Indigenous people up in Canada. And so there's a lot to this. I don't believe this is really true in terms of consenting to them. Back in March, Smith, the premier of Alberta, said she would create a What's Next panel after the election where she could see how people are feeling and see if any other referendum issues they want to put on the table. And so that's what I was referencing before is the panel that they're going to set up. And I think the referendum will be happening for sure. And to me, if you're an Albertan, worst case scenario, there's some type of renegotiation in terms of the carbon tax, in terms of resource extraction, things like that, that'll put you in a better position. That's worst case to where there could be renegotiation if they don't end up leaving. Now, the referendum could give them leverage to leave if it is over 52, 53%. It can't be a simple majority. The question is, I don't know if it's going to be there. And my guess is that Trump would be in favor of this, whether it's just separation for them to be technically their own country, whether it's separation. And this is where you start talking about, well, if they leave, now it's all of Western Canada. Now it's Saskatchewan. Now maybe you bring Manitoba in with British Columbia. Even though British Columbia is very liberal, there is a ton of rural areas within BC that are conservative. Not to say that British Columbia, in an event of a U.S. election, would vote right-wing. They wouldn't. They would be very left-wing. But the point of it is there's a cascade effect when it comes to Alberta potentially separating, and you could be looking at other provinces joining as well, although I think that would take a long time for it to play out. There's no really gauge on this happens in year 1, this happens in year 2, this happens in year 3 of the secession in terms of it actually coming to fruition. We don't know the legal time frame of them seceding. I think it could be fast-tracked, though, because of how powerful the United States is. Not saying that it's going to happen, and I don't think enough Albertans want to join the United States for this to be something where Trump goes total aggressive on. But I do think there could be enough that say, hey, we want to be independent with the opportunity to join the United States down the line. And that's something that I think Trump would also be interested in. So that's what it really comes down to in terms of that. But when it comes to these other provinces within Canada and Ottawa, they are going to say, no, absolutely not. You're not leaving, which is why it's important when it comes to that referendum that they get a very sizable majority, hopefully at least 55, but like 60-40. If you get a 60-40 majority and you get Trump on board and recognizing you as a people that have voted to leave Canada, I mean, that's through the Clarity Act. That would be above the simple majority. That's 60%. Now, there's other things that have to happen, including amending the Constitution. Would they be open to doing that? There could be political pressure that could be applied by Trump. And also, I mean, when it comes to the other provinces saying that, oh, Alberta should be able to leave, that seems like a long shot because of how important Alberta is to Canada. And you're not just going to vote to lose land in your own country. So there would have to be political pressure, I feel, applied by Trump. I mean, you think, well, their own province, they should be able to vote for it, and that's fine. But there's other logistical issues when it comes to this that need some coaxing, possibly from a bigger power like the US, to where we could give Alberta that support, and whatever the Canadian government says, this is justifiable for Trump to be supporting Alberta wanting to become independent because their own citizens voted for it. Now, all of this might end up being negotiations with Ottawa to give Alberta more rights in terms of resource extraction and possibly not subsidizing the eastern provinces in Canada. And if that's the case, then they'll stay. That's fine. And maybe there'll be another election in a year because of how hated Carney is. And you look at some of the updated seat numbers, the Liberal Party did not win by much at all. They could call an election possibly in a year. They're saying there's going to be a coalition between the NDP and the Liberals. But even with that, the seats that they won, it was quite underwhelming. It was a Liberal minority. And, I mean, obviously, Poilievre was the favorite coming into the year. Whether you want to say Trump had a huge impact or not, the point of it is there is still, and you look at even BC with the most seats going conservative in BC, there's still a large cohort of people that, especially considering how bad of a leader Carney is, and now it just came out, Trump's like, oh, I had a great conversation with him. I love the fact that Carney won. I mean, Trump did say he wanted Carney to win because he'd be easier to negotiate with. He doesn't have the conservative Canadian first style like Poilievre does. And so Carney is a total deer in headlights, and he is not qualified for this job. He was a banker. He came in a month ago, started campaigning, and I think Canadians are going to see that. And this is like you think like this would be the last straw. You think Trudeau is the last straw. I think this would be the last straw for them. So maybe it would just be a renegotiation with the Canadian government. There'll be another election in a year because they can call them depending on some certain stipulations, and then the Conservatives will win and Alberta will stay a Canadian province. We don't know exactly, but that's another thing that could be at play here. So the next step is the referendum. If the referendum goes through, if they are able to pass the, let's just say 55% threshold on becoming independent, I think the question will probably be set up in terms of them just being independent, not joining the United States. Maybe there'll be a thing to where it's posed down the line. Would you be interested in joining the United States? I think the United States can offer Alberta a ton in terms of just sheer money, like a 1-for-1 exchange rate, Canadian dollar versus USD. You do also get the military protection. I don't think the border security within Alberta is going to be a huge issue because of the rural areas. When you look at the border of BC and Alberta, the border of Saskatchewan and Alberta, and then to the north, you would have Northwest Territories, I believe, that borders Alberta, either that or Yukon. I believe Yukon, obviously, it's the most western territory, so that would be over BC. And then you have Nunavut, the most eastern one. And then the territories would be something interesting to talk about as well. If you take all of Western Canada, you would take the territories too. And people, they say, well, the territories are very liberal. It's a lot of indigenous native people. The population is so small to where if the territories were added to the United States, that would be sheer Arctic control and just total control of the Northwest Passage along with access to the Hudson Bay. That's what it would be. They're not voting. They don't have the populations to vote. They're just territories for Arctic control, and that would be a coup. That would be amazing if Trump was able to do that in terms of acquiring those territories. To me, it's extremely unlikely right now. I know a lot of people also are talking about connecting Alaska to the lower 48. They say, well, all you need is BC. I think based on the terrain, it's very mountainous in the area that BC connects to Alaska. So I think you would also need Yukon as well to do that, to do it sustainably. I mean, technically, I think you could connect it through BC. That's what people were telling me. But look, the point of it is when it comes to Alberta, Alberta's the first domino, and then you look at Saskatchewan, and now you've got a real movement forming. But Alberta is the first referendum that needs to happen. I think if it happens and it's 60-40, Saskatchewan will probably have a referendum as well. Saskatchewan and Alberta, in Canadian terms, are very conservative. They voted heavily conservative this past election. In American terms, you could say they're more independent. I still think Alberta would be conservative. I'm guessing Saskatchewan would be a swing state. Manitoba would be slightly liberal. BC would be definitely liberal, similar to Oregon or Washington. And that's the thing when you even look at Oregon possibly losing land through that greater Idaho movement. It's the exact same thing. The coastal areas are extremely liberal and they're highly densely populated. So the entire province of BC is liberal. Although you look at the recent voting, I mean, Poilievre, the conservative, won more seats than the Liberal Party, although it was kind of split. But even in BC, there's a ton of rural parts that are very, very conservative. So the point is, and look, I really, when it comes to all of Western Canada, the issue then becomes a stability factor with Eastern Canada. Eastern Canada would be extremely weak. You already have many, many secession attempts from Quebec. Would they try another one, considering they just lost all of Western Canada? More than half of their land is gone within the country of Canada to the United States. Would they just say, see, that's the problem. Then a liberal gets into office in the United States and they just say, well, let's just add all of them. Then you add all of them and you've got a huge issue because now you're adding Quebec, you're adding Ontario, you're adding Nova Scotia, you're adding New Brunswick, Prince Edward. I mean, all these places are extremely, extremely liberal. It's the Atlantic coast. You take a look at Rhode Island, Massachusetts, comparable to the United States. So it's a big problem. And that's something that we're not interested in doing under any circumstance, which I understand Trump has said, oh, we want to do that. It'd be fun to annex all of Canada, but it is not worth it at all. We're having a better situation in terms of the Electoral College with migration in 2030 and the updated census. I don't know how good it's going to be. It's impossible to say because there's still 5 years left of population movement, but the census is going to update and the congressional seats are going to move, which will affect directly the electoral votes, and it's going to be in favor of conservatives. I would be fine with adding Alberta and say, well, they get 8 or 9 electoral votes. I think they'd be conservative. I do. People say no, they'd be liberal. It depends on the election and who the candidates are, but I do think they would be, like, if you did a few polls, it'd be like Trump +5, Trump +6. Yes, Trump's radioactive in a lot of Canada, but I do think Alberta is conservative enough to where if it's Trump against someone like Kamala, Trump would win. Now, maybe I'm wrong on that. I've had people say, nope, Alberta is more comparable to a Minnesota, to a liberal state. I don't know about that. I mean, look, getting Alberta, even if they are a swing state, it would be huge because it would give us energy independence fully. And also it would give us more of an anchor and a presence with closer to the Arctic, I should say. So we'll see what happens. There's going to have to be the referendum. The key is to have overwhelming support, hopefully 55, maybe 60. I don't know if they can get there because I think they were at around 40% support, not even in terms of just some straw polls that were done before this election. It's gone up a little bit just because people are galvanized now and they feel complete distraught over another liberal government, especially one headed by Carney. But it's an issue to where you're going to need the 55 or 60% in the referendum. And then after that, you're going to have to negotiate with the Canadian government, at which point you might be able to be aided by Trump and the United States. If this was a liberal in power in the US, we wouldn't be talking about this because they would be very passive and they probably side with Carney in terms of not allowing Alberta to leave. But Trump's a different animal. Trump is someone that is pushing for Greenland. He's pushing for the Panama Canal. And he's talked about taking over all of Canada, but I'm guessing his advisors say, hey, listen, this is probably a better situation. Look at all the natural resources that Alberta has. Look at the way they're being treated by Ottawa. Maybe we just take them, and if they vote, they're probably conservative on top of that. So it's even better situation. But the problem is then it causes a domino effect to where, what are we going to take over the entire country? But we don't want that. We do not want that. There's just too many liberals, and the United States is getting more conservative. On average, especially young people are getting more conservative, just like in Canada. Boomers are more liberal now. Canada, it's next level, though. It's like the young people are legit all conservative, and the boomers are Because in the United States, the boomers are like 50-50, maybe like liberals +2, +3. Now, when it comes to approval rating, they hate Trump because their 401ks and things like that. Although the stock market's rebounded significantly after Liberation Day, but that's not what this video is about. The point of it is boomers in North America are getting more liberal, and younger people are more conservative. And that's very key when it comes to future demographics and what we're going to be seeing when it comes to not just the United States, but also Canada and possibly Alberta, with a lot of young people in Alberta being conservative, if we were to add them as a state. So that's just the current state of it. There's a lot of people saying, well, you need this, that, the other. It's going to be very easy. It's going to be very hard. It's very vague when it comes to the separation and the legal work and amending the Constitution within Canada. But that requires significant public support and momentum via a referendum. So that's the first step. But either way, guys, that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Also, like the video down below. Thanks for watching.